Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about one of the greatest legends of Cornwall, a legend that is famous around the world, the legend of Tristram and Isolde. You might already have heard of this legend under the name The Legend of Tristan and Isolde, for Tristram and Isolde are known under various names. But for this video I will refer to them as Tristram and Isolde. So sit back, relax and listen to The Legend of Tristram and Isolde. The legend begins with the birth of Tristram. Tristram was born as the son of King Llewellyn and Blanchefleur, sister to Mark, the King of Cornwall. But the birth of the young prince wasn't a happy day. On the day of his birth, Tristram's father died in battle, leaving his mother heartbroken, so that she too died after the birth. Now an orphan, surrounded by the enemies of his father, young Tristram was taken by a loyal companion of his father, Ruel, and hidden away. Ruel adopted the child and raised him together with his wife as their own. He grew up with loving parents, but oblivious to the fact who he really was. He was raised in a manner that befits a royal son, and taught in everything a prince would need to know. He learned how to behave, all graces he could ever need, and a lot of skills, from hunting over swordsmanship to playing the harp, and lots more. And since Tristram was an intelligent child and a quick learner, he soon mastered all the skills he was taught, and grew into a brave, honorable, and all in all chivalrous young man. But when Tristram was only 14 years old, fate hit again. He was abducted by Norwegian merchants and about to become a slave, when suddenly a terrible storm hit the Norwegian ship, saving him. For the Norwegian merchants were very superstitious and believed that this storm was a sign of the gods, that they shouldn't have abducted Tristram. They prayed and pledged that they would set him free if the storm would only pass. And when the storm passed, they stood to their vow towards the gods and set Tristram free when they next found a port. And so, young Tristram landed at the port of Cornwall. From there, he made his way to the court of King Mark, not knowing that he was his uncle. The king quickly was impressed by Tristram's valor and skills, and so he soon made him his courtier and trusted companion. But while Tristram was settling on the King of Cornwall's court, Ruel searched for his adopted son far and wide. He managed to hunt down the Norwegian merchants who had abducted Tristram and found out what had really happened. And so, Ruel made his way to the port of Cornwall, where they had set Tristram free. And from there, just like Tristram, he made his way to the court of the king, and finally found Tristram. He was brought before the king, and after all these years finally revealed who Tristram really was. The king was overjoyed to find his nephew and the man he trusted so much, and proclaimed Tristram to be his heir, since he had no wife or children of his own. And to protect Tristram's claim to the throne, King Mark also swore never to marry. And soon after this fateful day, Tristram was knighted. This could be the happy ending of a tale of a lost prince, but Tristram's story had just begun. But let's take a look at Isolde's family. Isolde was the daughter of King Gudremon and Queen Isolde of Ireland. She had an uncle, the queen's brother, called Morholt, who was of giant stature and who was known for his legendary sword skills and his strength. The King of Ireland used Morholt to extract tributes from Cornwall and England. And thanks to his appearance and the tales surrounding Morholt, nobody dared to challenge him, even though the tributes grew higher and higher. At some point, Tristram grew tired of Cornwall being oppressed by Ireland, and he decided to act. On a small island inside of Cornwall, he wanted to challenge Morholt and to end the oppression. And so word got to Morholt, and both fighters made their way to the island, each in his own boat. When Tristram arrived on the island shortly after Morholt, he kicked his own boat back into the sea. And when Morholt asked why he had done so, Tristram just grinned and answered that either way, only one of them would leave the island alive, and that Morholt's boat seemed to be pretty adequate for Tristram's departure. And so the fight between the two skilled swordsmen began. Morholt pretty soon managed to stab Tristram in the leg, and thus drawing first blood. In any fair fight, this wouldn't have been a major problem for Tristram, but the giant Morholt was devious. His sword was poisonous, and so he grinned and told Tristram that this small wound would be his death sentence, for only his sister, Queen Isolde, knew how to cure the poison. Seeing how skilled Tristram was, Morholt tried to bring him to give up, and promised him to bring him to his sister if he only admitted defeat. But brave Tristram didn't even think twice, and charged at Morholt, knocking him down and cutting the giant's arm off, with only one stroke of his sword. Morholt screamed out in pain as a second hit split his skull. But the blow was so hard that the sword itself broke, and the piece got stuck in the skull of the giant. The fight was over. Morholt was dead, and Tristram returned to his uncle's court, where he was greeted by the loud cheers of the Cornish people. But when the young hero didn't believe at first what the giant had said about the poison, his wound, which wouldn't heal no matter what he did, showed him that Morholt indeed had spoken the truth. There was only one way for Tristram to survive. He needed the healing powers of the Queen of Ireland. And so Tristram gathered the bravest and most trustworthy men around him and sailed with them towards Dublin. Knowing that he who had killed the Queen's brother wouldn't be welcomed, he took a small boat, his harp and a few supplies, and rowed to shore on his own, playing the most beautiful tunes on his harp. When he was found by passengers, he told them that he was attacked and wounded by pirates, and then set adrift. He talked a while with the passengers, and then let show that he had heard of the legendary healing skills of the Queen, and asked the passengers to bring him to the Queen to get help. As charming as Tristram was, the passengers believed him and brought him before the Queen. Queen Isolde was intrigued by what the passengers told her about the harp-playing skills of Tristram, even though he seemed to be mortally wounded. She agreed to help him, but in return, he had to teach her daughter, Princess Isolde, how to play the harp as beautiful as he did. Of course, Tristram agreed, and so the Queen treated his wound, which soon finally began to heal. When Tristram met the princess for the first harp lesson, he was immediately enchanted by her beauty, and soon after, by her will of learning. She learned quickly, and enchanted Tristram even more with her beautiful singing voice. He was captured by her. But the day arrived that his wound was healed, and the princess didn't need any more lessons, for she had become a skilled harp player herself. And so Tristram knew his time had come to leave Ireland. But he also knew that the Queen wouldn't let him leave without a good reason. And so he told her that he was married and had to return to his wife, who waited faithfully for his return to Cornwall. And indeed, the Queen believed him and sent him off to a wife that didn't exist. Finally, after all this time, he was back in Cornwall and at the court of his uncle, who was overjoyed to have Tristram back at his side. But it came to be that during his absence, the followers of the king weren't fond of the thought that King Mark had vowed to not marry just to please Tristram. They tried to diminish Tristram in the eyes of the king, to make him wed and bring them an heir, but nothing worked. The king was loyal to his nephew. But when Tristram told Mark of the Irish princess, and her beauty and her voice, and described her to Mark as a unique and magical being, the king came to decide that he would marry her and nobody else. For if his nephew thought so high of her, she was worth it. And apart from that, a marriage like this would bring peace between Cornwall and Ireland. But this wasn't as easy as it sounds, since both kingdoms were fierce enemies, and the Irish king wouldn't just give his daughter to King Mark. And so Mark asked Tristram for advice, and Tristram developed a cunning plan to fulfill his uncle's wish. He had heard of a dragon that caused havoc in the lands of Ireland, and it was rumored that the king was so desperate that he promised his daughter's hand to the hero that would be able to slay the dragon. Tristram's plan was simple. He would go back to Ireland, slay the dragon, and claim the prize for his uncle. And so he sailed back to Ireland, hunted down the dragon that plagued the land, and fought him. It was a long battle between the brave knight and the devilish creature, but in the end, Tristram claimed victory. Wounded and exhausted from the fight, he knew he had to bring proof of his victory, and so he decided to cut out the dragon's tongue to bring as a trophy. What Tristram didn't know, though, was that the dragon's tongue was poisonous. And so, on his way to the court of the Irish king, his exhaustion grew, and he jumped into a shallow pool in the hope that this would keep him alive. In the meantime, the king's chief stumbled across the remains of the slain dragon, and since nobody had claimed the kill yet, and he himself had a great desire for the king's daughter's hand, he decided to claim the kill for himself. He cut off the dragon's head and brought it before the king as a proof of what he said was true, and claimed his prize. As delighted as the king was that the dragon was slain, as devastated was Princess Isolde that she had to marry the chief. Seeing how unhappy her daughter was, and sensing that something about the story the chief told was off, the queen, skilled in some ways of magic, had a vision. She saw a handsome young man slaying the dragon, and she saw the same man lying wounded in a shallow pond. Together with her daughter, she followed where her vision led her, and found Tristram lying in the water. They found the dragon's tongue with him, and recognized him as the man that taught Isolde how to play the harp. While the queen tried to help Tristram, she asked the half-conscious Tristram why he was back in Ireland. He told her that he was a merchant, and that he had hoped to gain protection and a favor from the king if he slays the beast. The both women took him with them to the castle, where the queen nursed him once again back to health. While Tristram was treated by the queen, Princess Isolde couldn't stop noticing how handsome he had become. But her growing affection towards him grew cold when she found his sword and saw that it was missing a piece matching the piece that was found in her uncle's remains. She immediately confronted Tristram with her evidence and got him to admit what had happened. When her mother found both Tristram and Isolde, the princess told her who Tristram really was, and that she was going to get her revenge for her uncle's death. But to her surprise, her mother forbade it. After all, she had already promised protection to Tristram. No matter what he had done, she wouldn't break her word. Tristram, not really eager to wait for the queen to change her mind, took his chances and offered a deal to both Isoldes. He would get the princess out of the arranged marriage with the chief, in proving that it was indeed him who had slain the dragon, and instead offered a match with the King of Cornwall. Both women thought about the proposal for a moment and agreed. Tristram went to the king and presented the dragon's tongue to him, disproving the claim of the chief and proving his own brave deed. The king wasn't happy about the proposal of Tristram to marry Isolde to the King Mark of Cornwall, but since he had already agreed to give his daughter's hand to the hero, he agreed. And so it was decided that Tristram should escort the young princess to Cornwall, to the court of King Mark, to celebrate the wedding. But before both set sail to Cornwall, Queen Isolde made a strong potion, to be drunk by the princess and King Mark upon their wedding night, to ensure that their marriage would be a very happy and joyful one. She mixed the potion into a bottle of wine and gave it to the confidant of the princess. And so the wedding party set their sails and traveled to Cornwall. The voyage was a long one, and storms made it even longer. Princess Isolde wasn't able to forgive Tristram for what he had done to her uncle, and so the two young people quarreled whenever they met on the ship. The storms kept raging, making everyone on board seasick, and so Tristram decided to sail into the next best port to give everyone a break. The whole crew was thankful to have solid ground under their feet again, and so everybody left the ship to regain well-being. The only two people who stayed on board were Isolde and Tristram. Now confronted with one another, they started to talk, and after a while, they decided to drink something. But their attempt to reconcile went into the wrong direction when they, not knowing that it was more than just wine, opened the bottle of Isolde's mother and drank from it together. They already had drunk a good bit of the contents when Isolde's confidant, the one who was supposed to guard the bottle, came back to the ship, saw them, and immediately threw the bottle into the ocean. He warned them not to drink more, but it was already too late. The young people recognized after a while that they didn't hate each other anymore. Even their mistrust and their quarrels had disappeared. Instead, they began to feel affection for one another. This feeling grew and grew until both were deeply in love with one another and barely could stand to be apart. And even before they reached the court of King Mark, Isolde was no longer able to say that she was a maiden. Isolde managed to let the wedding night pass without letting the king know what had happened. Some say it was with the help of a lot of wine. Others say her confidant changed places with Isolde that night to help. Either way, the king was unaware of the love between Tristram and Isolde. But as time passed, the effect of the potion didn't. Tristram's and Isolde's love grew, and they met whenever they could. The King of Cornwall grew suspicious over time, and at some point had enough of what was going on, and banished both from his court. The both lovers took refuge in a cave in a nearby forest, and were undisturbed for a while, until the king's men found them. But when they got closer, they only found the two lying next to each other, sleeping, with a sword between them. For Tristram and Isolde knew their affair mustn't be able to be proved. The king took the sword between them as a sign for their loyalty and fidelity, as they had planned, and invited them back to court. But at this point, both lovers knew they had to end the affair, one way or the other, for otherwise they both wouldn't survive it. And so Tristram decided to leave Cornwall, to find a new home and a new life. With a ring from Isolde as parting gift and a heavy heart, he left and made his way to Arundel, a small island between England and Brittany. It was there that he met the knight Caelan and his lovely unwedded sister Isolde. Tristram stayed in Caelan's castle, and after a while in Isolde's company, Tristram, who wasn't sure how to feel, decided to marry Isolde. But his love for his Isolde was so strong that he couldn't bear the thought of loving another, and so he made up excuses to not sleep near his new wife. This, of course, didn't go unnoticed by Caelan, and someday he confronted Tristram about it. Having found a true friend in Caelan, Tristram couldn't lie to him, and so he told him the whole story. What he didn't know at this point was that his new wife had heard the whole conversation and grew jealous beyond compare. It wasn't long after that Tristram fought for Kayvan in a battle and was again injured with a poisoned weapon. He knew that now that she had the healing abilities of her mother, the only one who could save him from the poison was his love Isolde, the Queen of Cornwall. And as soon as he told this to his best friend Kayvan, he agreed to sail to Isolde, hoping to get her to come back with him and to heal Tristram. The man agreed to a signal. If Kayvan would return with Isolde, he would fly a white flag, for this would mean life to Tristram. But if Isolde hadn't agreed to come with Kayvan, he would only fly a black flag, for nothing would be able to save Tristram then. And so Tristram would know what to await long before Kayvan reached him. But once again, Tristram's wife had heard the whole conversation and grew even more jealous and hateful towards the other Isolde. And so, when Kayvan's ship was in sight, returning from Queen Isolde's court, Tristram, who was already too weak to look for the signal by himself, asked his wife which flag she saw. But the hateful Isolde responded she would only see a black flag. Tristram's heart broke. He truly had lost the love of his life. And even though it was not yet for the poison to kill him, his broken heart took the life from him, and he closed his eyes, never to open them again. The ship came closer, and indeed it was a white flag that was flying, not a black one. Queen Isolde was on board, and as soon as the ship reached land, she ran to her love, only to learn that she was too late. She kneeled down next to his body, laid her head on his chest, and started crying. He had given up his life for hers, and so she would give up hers for his. And so she too died of a broken heart, right in her lover's arms, to be together with him in death and in eternity. The two lovers were buried next to each other, and from both graves a tree grew, wrapping their branches around each other, never to be separated again. A sign that love can conquer everything. And that was the tale of Tristram and Isolde, a tragic legend of deep love, jealousy, and betrayal. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time. Bye!